All right, welcome back everyone. I hope you're all doing well. In this video, I am discussing another book by Dr. Gabor Maté. So this is the third book by him that I'm reviewing. This one is titled In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction. So this book is about addictions, the lives of individuals living with addiction. What I love the most about this book is how much it is about real people, real human beings, concrete human individuals, instead of some abstract theory, some academic discussion about addiction. In this book, we meet individuals, a set of individuals with all of their messy, contradictory inconsistencies who are struggling, and addiction is not the only thing they're struggling with. And it is not, in most cases, the primary problem for them. They're struggling with not having, we can say most generally, they're struggling with not having a place in the world, not having a place in society. They're struggling against their own impulses that seem impossible to control, against their traumatic past, the traumas of in their individual histories or family histories, or traumas that come from several generations before. They're struggling against the negative judgments of other people, against the forces that want to criminalize them, demonize them. We read about their addictive behavior and how that is a way of coping for them, which in turn, unfortunately, leads to other destructive strategies like stealing, lying, prostitution, and other means of coping. So I said that it is really important to pay attention to examples, concrete individuals, as opposed to theory. Why is that important? Because working with examples means that you are faithful to reality, not to theories about reality, not to your way of knowing, your way of judging. Examples kind of get us past our theoretical biases and prejudices. And Gabor Maté takes that one step further. He brings in the reality of his own life. He includes himself in the discussion, and he invites us to include ourselves as we are thinking about the topic, as we get into this world of addiction. He invites us to see how we already belong to that world. What world? The world that first gives rise to addiction, the world that kind of is the background of addiction, encourages it, presents it as a way of coping. So there's a world that gives rise to it, but that same world wants to demonize it and repress it. So it is a world of judgment, boundaries, harsh attitudes, and repression. Maté wants to move against that, to counteract those tendencies. By including himself, he wants to remove boundaries that separate us from those so-called addicts, monsters, hungry ghosts. He wants us to recognize ourselves in their problems, in their stories. Something else that I really like about Maté's writing, what makes him, in my view, a great thinker, a great researcher, a great writer, is the fact that he does not limit himself to what he originally picks as his topic. He does not limit himself to that narrow initial choice of the problem or the question. He allows his exploration to take him further, to connect him to other relevant areas, to other relevant perspectives. So as a result, we see with him that none of the fields he touches on can tell the whole story about addiction. Individual choice is not the whole story. Genetics is not the whole story. Neurology, neural chemistry is not the whole story. What else? Parenting is not the whole story. Economics, social issues. All of these perspectives, all of these areas are necessary in a kind of holistic, balanced understanding. He shows us that to understand the life of human beings suffering from addiction, we need to appreciate all of these areas, all of these ways of understanding, all of these angles, perspectives. So let's just go through one instance of what I mean by connections among areas. So the connection between genetics and development, or genetic potential and our relationship to our environment. How both of those areas and the interaction between them allows us to understand the problem. So we are genetically equipped to find ourselves in environments, to kind of fit in environments, to be coupled in with our environments in a way that supports our life form. So we are predisposed. We are genetically predisposed. We have the genetic equipment, genetic potential to kind of fit into an environment, into a kind of environment. And that environment offers us attachment relationships, so attachment bonds with our parents, caregivers. And secondly, the environment also hosts our rewarding activities. So it's an environment in which we can pursue goals. That's the kind of environment that we learn about. It is stable enough that we can learn about it, and it has a consistency that supports our learning. So to find attachments with caregivers, to explore what is out there, what is rewarding, to discover in an environment, in the right environment, to discover our goal-directed activities. So we discover what kinds of things we can do that give us reward, that make us feel good. Or to use the neurochemical language, that activities that engage our dopaminergic system, that correlate with that feeling of reward. But that there's no guarantee that we are going to find ourselves in that kind of environment, in the right environment, supportive, with the right relationships, right caregivers, and it is rich enough to help us understand or discover our behaviors, the right behaviors, the behavioral repertoires that any animal has. If our environment doesn't provide us with the necessary stable resources, secure attachments, stable avenues for activities and bonding, developing the right habits, we don't reach maturity with respect to our sensitivity to reward. So the person who is susceptible to addiction, one of their characteristics that they tend to have is that their reward system is not sufficiently developed. They're not capable of feeling reward, feeling the enjoyment of the activities that normal development would allow. Then, when we do find rewarding behavior in that position, if you are in that position, when we do find something that is rewarding, we might become, or we are susceptible to becoming addicted to it, to fixating on a behavior or on a substance, because we are getting from it what we were supposed to get from elsewhere. So someone who is addicted to drugs or to a behavior like compulsive shopping, or someone who is addicted to social media use, excessive social media use, or sex addiction, that person is engaging, according to Maté, in self-soothing behavior. They're trying to soothe themselves. They're trying to cover a deep-seated sense of anxiety and pain. To understand addictive behavior, we should ask, what is the addiction doing? What pain, what anxiety is it trying to soothe, trying to cover? Here, there's a connection to ADD, attention deficit, which was the subject of Maté's first book, and he does make that connection explicit. He does explore that himself in this book. Just like attention deficit disorder, addiction is a problem of impulse control. It is a problem of self-regulation and learning or failing to learn, failing to develop the mechanisms of self-regulation, emotion regulation. And both ADD and addiction are rooted more deeply, they are rooted both in anxiety and are exacerbated by stress, both of them. So those are the common characteristics, which is why we should be mindful of factors causing stress when we are dealing with addiction. Because stress can cause addictive behavior or relapse, makes things worse. So what factors cause stress? At least 4 factors that Maté discusses: uncertainty, isolation, loss of control, feeling that you have lost control, and conflict. The second half of the book, in the second half, Maté offers a critique of the war on drugs. So he adopts here a kind of social, legal, law enforcement perspective and the right way of dealing with the problem of drug use. So he offers a critique of the so-called war on drugs discourse. He argues in favor of decriminalizing drug use, which he points out is not the same thing as legalizing drugs or drug abuse. So he also argues in favor of focusing on harm reduction. So kind of in some cases, it is better to enable drug use, enable safe drug use, because if the clients, patients, individuals, if they're allowed to, if they're given the opportunity to safely use the drug that they want, they need, that will reduce the kind of harms that they might have if they use unsanitized needles, for example. Giving them a safe context, a safe alternative, that's the point of harm reduction. Maté argues also that our treatment of individuals with substance abuse is related to our refusal to recognize in ourselves and in the wider society the same characteristics that we admonish with drug addiction. So we are not that different, Maté argues, from people who severely and obviously are dealing with drug addiction. So in the corporate world or in the academic world, people also have these, they engage in behaviors that give them an ego boost or a hit in the ego. People fall into workaholism. We engage in all kinds of pleasure-seeking, escapist, hedonistic activities that favor short-term gratification and help us escape long-term thinking, or thinking in general, mindfulness and acting with intention. This book also includes proposed solutions and methods of healing. Maté pays attention to the societal level, the relational level, and the individual level, and offers solution for each of these perspectives. For the individual, he offers a method based on mindfulness practice. That's towards the end of the book, I think, the chapter before the last. For communities and people closely involved, like family members of addicts, he writes that we must prioritize our relationship with them, the safety of that relationship. We must try to preserve and protect the relationship instead of focusing on fixing the person, fixing the drug addicts, which is the attitude of conditional acceptance. The most valuable, the most significant thing a person can have, Maté reminds us, and he writes that in all of his books, is an unconditional regard for their human worth, their unconditional regard for their worth as a human being, as a living creature, unique individual. This is what addicted individuals need most deeply, above everything else, more than any practical tips or techniques or assistance or the pressure we might put on them. They need that unconditional regard more than anything that we might offer practically. Okay, final thoughts. So I found the book, personally, I found it quite painful to read. And it kind of had me teary-eyed on a couple of occasions, couple of places. It's beautiful, moving, but painful. If I had one criticism about Maté's general approach, it is that he might be relying too much on narratives. I don't want to say he commits the narrative fallacy. I would just say that it seems to be relying too much on narratives, plotting the lives of the people he's writing about, even his own life. What do I mean by that? Why is that a problem? All of our lives, every individual life has some degree of narrative coherence. It has some organization, my life, your life. You tell a story about your life, and that story kind of brings organization and coherence into your life, into specific episodes, but also generally, and the place of each episode within a broader narrative. But the radical existentialist stance, which is the same creative stance that Maté encourages us towards the end of the book, the creative stance that he adopts when he writes his books requires seeing the imperfections of those narratives, the failures of our existing narratives to make complete sense of our lives. So the fact that you can create a new story, a new life story, implies that There are holes or loopholes in your existing narratives, and those loopholes are escape routes. That is to say, we are not fully explained by any coherent life narrative, including the life narratives of trauma, why somebody got into an addictive pattern of behavior or multiple addictions. Of course, those stories make sense. They are very tragic. But to accept them as perfect, as perfect explanation, to me, it gives a sense of defeatism that I don't want to accept. Of course, I think Maté would agree with my sentiment, that creative stance, that existentialist stance. And I think he would say that we can move more effectively beyond those stories. We can more effectively transcend our life stories once we understand them. We understand not in order to fall into defeatism. We understand in order to create, to recreate, to revise. You can revise and recreate something only after you understand it. So I think that's an important point. And Maté does bring up very briefly that idea of recreation, revision of a life towards the end of the book. He does rely a bit too much, in my view, in my humble view, on the coherence of narratives and in explaining addiction, ADD, and all the other developmental problems. But if you keep in mind that balance of understanding and then revising, recreating, and creating our lives, in that kind of project, I think this book is an incredible resource. So I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed the pain, the painful insights, the painful stories in the realm of hungry ghosts. After this, I think I will be talking in my next video next week about a book that Maté co-authored with Gordon Neufeld. It is about parenting and the relationship between children and parents. If you have any comments, any thoughts, any insights, if you are reading works by Maté, I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention, and till next time.